Going to be looking at the 2024 presidential map if Trump were to do 10% better than he did in every state in 2020. So this would definitely be a very good night for Trump, a very large electoral win, but this is very unlikely to happen. Still, a fun scenario to look at though. So we're just going to start with some of the more likely states and kind of work our way down. Maybe I'll just go west to east too. Maybe that'll simplify a little. So I'll start with the state of Washington. Washington was a Biden plus 19.2% state. In a scenario where it shifts about 10 points to the right, you would see that go down to 99.2% for Biden, which is for Harris this year, which is a very small margin. So it would be pretty interesting to see because you would probably see Trump improve massively in rural Washington while doing a little bit better in Whitman and Spokane, and then also doing better in kind of the southwest corner of the state and potentially in places like Clallam. So, it would still be a decent Harris win, but still a lot smaller than it should be. The next state is Oregon, which would go down to a 6.1% win, which would be a little less than Washington, but still a similar margin. Again, Trump mainly improving in rural areas, and then maybe coming back in some of the suburban areas, making it closer to a 2016-style map in some of the suburban counties. So again, a likely margin out of Oregon, out of Nevada, a likely margin for Donald Trump of 7.6%, which would be a huge margin. And if we're saying we just shift every county 10 points to the right, that means Clark narrowly flips and goes for Trump by 0.6%, which again would be a very large flip, a very good piece of news for Trump, and very good news for the Nevada Republicans in the future, because if Trump's winning a state by 7.6%, that means Republicans have a very, very bright future in the state. However, again, this is very unlikely. The next state, Arizona, would be a 99.7% win for Donald Trump. And with that, he would win Maricopa by about 7 points. Around that margin, a very, very nice win. That would be larger than, I believe going back to 2012, that was about what Romney got. Yeah, about 10.7, so a little less. But he would win the state of Arizona by 9.7%, which sure, that was the margin that candidates used to be winning it by. I mean, Romney won it by 9.1, but in the modern political sphere that we have now, winning Arizona by 9.7 as a MAGA Republican is near impossible. Next, we'll go to Colorado, which was Biden plus 13.5%. In this scenario, it would only be Biden plus 13.5% if this were to be 2020 still, but again, with Harris being on the ticket, this is 3.5%. Now, as you can see here, Biden made very large gains in these suburban counties surrounding Denver in 2020 compared to 2016, especially even compared to 2012. There were some very large shifts in the suburban areas overall from 2016 to 2012, a little bit opposite from 2012 to 2016. You saw a lot of rural changes too in that year towards the right, which helped Trump, but a lot of suburban areas too. You did see left trends. But then again, in 2020, you saw a lot of left trends, and the state has continued to do that in the 2022 midterms, and probably will. But in the scenario where the state is shifting so much, it would go down to a lean margin of only 3.5%. The next state is New Mexico. It would actually be one of the closest states. It was a 10.8% margin for Joe Biden, meaning it would be a 0.8% win for Kamala Harris. In this scenario, Trump would flip Grant County, Socorro County, and Cibola County. Guadalupe would be pretty close, and Sandoval County would be close as well. That just shows how red this map would be. It would be a very interesting map out of New Mexico. Again, it's very unlikely that a Republican, especially Trump, comes that close to winning, but it sure would be an interesting election to watch. Out of Nebraska's 2nd district, if it shifted 10 points to the right, Trump would only win this by 3.4%, which really does show how far this district has shifted recently. I mean, it used to be a pretty reliably Republican win. In 2012, it was Romney plus 7.1%. Sure, it voted for Obama by 1.3% in 2008, but in such a blue wave, it only barely voted for him. In 2016, it still voted for Trump by 2.2%, and then it flipped in 2020 and went to Biden by 6.6%. So it would still be a flip for Donald Trump, but it would still only be around a 3.4% margin in such a red wave like this. And we'll go to Illinois next. This is a likely margin. Illinois was a state that did shift to the right very narrowly. It was Biden plus 17, and this would be about a 7-point margin for Kamala Harris. You'd probably see Donald Trump improving a lot in rural Illinois as a whole, especially in kind of the southern tip. There's still a lot of room to gain here in places like Jackson County, but then also Trump would probably gain in the working class areas of the Chicagoland area, so good news for Trump. And if this were to happen, this could potentially open for some low-level gains for Republicans in Congress, and places like Illinois are at least races becoming a lot closer. Maybe it sets up Republicans for a competitive gubernatorial race in 2026. Maybe it even sets them up for a competitive Senate race. But again, it's still very unlikely to happen. Next, we'll go to Wisconsin. This would be a 9.4% win for Donald Trump, meaning Trump would do insanely well in the western side of the state. He would do very well in places like Racine and Kenosha. He would flip Door County by a very large margin, and he would flip Fond du Lac County by a large margin. He would even almost win a lot of these counties up north. He would barely lose Ashland. Bayfield would be a decent win for Harris still, but he would actually win Douglas by a significant margin. This would be very good news for Trump, with a 9.4% margin out of the state. After that, Michigan was a state that voted for Biden by 2.8%, so it would be a 7.2% win for Donald Trump. This would mean that places like Kent would even flip back. You would see Trump do very well in Oakland, East County would flip, Sago County would be pretty red, and overall, you would just see a very, very red map out of Michigan, which would be very interesting. You really haven't seen it be that red in a long time. Again, it would be a lot of the working class area shifting so far, right? And then next state we will go to is Minnesota. This would be a 3.9% win for Donald Trump, and this would mean that he would flip places like Carleton, Lake County, Clay County, Blue Earth, Nicolay. Oldstead County would barely hold for the Democrat, Kamala Harris, and Winona County as well. Also, places like Dakota and Washington would be closer too, and Washington would actually flip. This is not figuring in that, Tim Walz is going to help in some of these areas. Again, this is just based on the raw numbers we got from 2020, with no 2024 influences included. Because again, this map is so unlikely to happen. I mean, you're not going to see red Minnesota this year. You're not going to see a barely blue New Mexico. You're not going to see likely red Michigan. Just very, very unlikely. Next, let's take a bit of a trip to the East Coast. We'll start with Rhode Island. This was Biden plus 20.8, and then in the event that there would be a 10-point swing to the right, it would only be D plus 10.8, so a very smaller margin compared to that. And as you can see here, places like Kent, Rhode Island, would flip Republican. Washington would be a likely margin. You would have Newport and Providence still be safe margins, but a pretty interesting map and a pretty interesting scenario out of Rhode Island. Then Connecticut, another likely state. The state did vote for Joe Biden by a similar margin to Rhode Island by about 20 points. So that would be a 10-point win out of Connecticut. You would see Trump win Litchfield by a huge margin, Windham too, and then places like Tolland would be pretty close, but it would still be a narrow Harris win. Other counties would be closer, but still all Harris wins as well. So, a 10-point win out of the state. Next state we'll go to is New Jersey, which was a Joe Biden win of 15.9%. So, it would be a likely margin, a small likely margin though, of 5.9%. As you can see here, Trump would gain a lot in places like Gloucester, Atlantic, and Cumberland, actually flipping all those counties, and then flipping Morris County as well. This county and this state as a whole would be pretty close, only about a 6-point win, but it would still be a win for Harris nonetheless. The next likely state for Kamala Harris is the state of Delaware. This is Joe Biden's home state, and he won it by 19 points, which was up by the 11 points that Clinton ended up winning the state by in 2020 or 2016. Again, this was because Biden was from the state, but you figure that if you take away 10 points in a scenario like this, Harris is only up by 9 points in the state, so pretty surprising. The next state we'll go to, I suppose, is Florida. I didn't include Florida as a safe state off the bat because I just wanted to talk about it briefly, as it would be a pretty interesting county map. As you can see here, places like, of course, Hillsborough, Pinellas would flip, Seminole would flip, Osceola would be close, Miami-Dade would flip, Palm Beach would be very close, Duval County would flip, and overall you just see a very, very red map. This isn't even, figuring in the trends you're likely to see in Florida this year to the right, especially in a lot of those heavy Latino, a lot of the southern parts of the state. You're going to see that as well. So even without that, very good news for Trump, bringing him up to 272 electoral votes. The next state we'll go to is North Carolina. It would barely be a likely margin by 1.3%, comma, still a likely margin though, but still a very, very strong margin out of the state. Trump had improved greatly in the northeastern part of the state, flipping places like Nash and Wilson, as well as Pasquotank. But then he would also improve in Anson, and just overall, again, 10 points in every county. But he would flip a lot of these more competitive counties, and this would give him the state by over 11 points. So, a very, very strong showing here. But again, so unlikely that this happens. I mean, you're not going to see a borderline landslide scenario like this in 2024 for either candidate. And then out of Georgia, a state that Biden won narrowly, it would go to Trump by 9.8%, comma, basically a 9.8% win for Donald Trump. You would see massive improvements in southwestern Georgia. Sumter County would flip, Terrell County would flip, Randolph County, Clay County would barely hold for Harris. But then, Washington, Jefferson, those counties would flip. Baldwin as well, Cobb County and Newton County would narrowly hold for Harris. But overall, a 10-point swing out of Georgia would just be a very, very interesting scenario. It would definitely help down-ballot candidates. Potentially, you could even see the second district flip in a scenario like this on the congressional level, but still very unlikely it happens. The next state we'll go to is Pennsylvania, which is another likely state. This was a Biden plus 1.2% margin, so it would be about Trump plus 8.8%. As you can see here, Trump would win counties like Bucks, Northampton, Monroe, Lackawanna, Lehigh, Center County, Dauphin, and Erie County. So, all massive wins for him. Harris would basically only win the counties of Allegheny, Chester, Montgomery, Philadelphia, and Delaware, so only 5 counties for her, which is pretty interesting. That would be a very nice margin for Trump. Again, about almost 9 points. The next state we'll go to is New Hampshire, which would be a lean margin for Donald Trump. The state voted for Joe Biden by 7.4%, comma, and in the event that it did take a 10-point shift to the right, Trump would flip Carroll, Merrimack, Sullivan, Hillsborough, and Rockingham counties, and Harris would only carry 3 counties, being Stratford, Grafton, and Cheshire. Then the next 2 states we have are the last 2 states, Maine at large and Virginia. I'll start with Virginia. This would be a very, very, very narrow hold for Kamala Harris. And potentially, you could see it be this close if early voting, is actually as good as it is for Republicans, as people are saying. So, potentially, this could be a scenario where you see Harris barely win it like this. Still doubt that, but in this scenario, it would still be a Kamala Harris win, but by 0.1%, so very, very narrow. But places like Virginia Beach, you would see Republicans improving in kind of the central or kind of eastern central part of the state. You would see Republicans improving a lot. There's a bit of room to gain in the northern part of the state. So overall, just a lot of good news for Republicans, but still a hold for Harris. And then the last state. This is Maine at large. This would be a 0.9% win for Donald Trump out of the state. A very nice margin of victory here. Very unlikely, but, if Trump manages to win Maine at large, that would be very good news for the Maine Republicans. And if Trump wins Maine at large in the presidency, then he is basically guaranteed to win overall. And he's basically guaranteed to do very well. So this would be the map if Trump improves by 10 points in every state. It's a pretty interesting map. I mean, Trump has the potential, according to this, to get up to 329 electoral votes, but the chances that you see every state shift 10 points to the right are just very, very unlikely.